Dr. Sharon was 30 years with Minnesota State University in Moorhead, and is intimately aware of the ideas of sociology. And I present Joel Sharon.
The first time I'll start and then get a microphone. The first time I got involved in sociology was in Sociology 110, 1957. And it was a terrible, terrible class. And there were actually, my undergraduate work was not very interesting. I didn't really understand sociology when I was an undergraduate. I graduated and then I taught in high school for 12 years. And there would always be, in social studies, I would talk about sociology, but I really didn't know what I was talking about. It was when I became a master's and PhD, I really started to understand sociology. And it really took me, once I started teaching, I really got interested in sociology. I think that there are certain real reasons why sociology is not something that most people accept, especially in the United States. I think that there are certain problems with sociology which I think works for it. For example, people. I hope I can do this well. And we'll talk a little bit back and forth. It'll be more interesting. But let me just start by saying that it's a lot easier to believe in psychology than it is to believe in sociology. Psychology is a real interesting and relatively much easier to understand than in sociology. A psychologist focuses on the individual and thinks of the individual as a person. And so what we have to do then is examine the person and understand basically why that person develops as he or she develops. That is really much easier than understanding that we are not persons. We are ultimately social actors, the sociologists would argue. That when we study the human being, we understand the human being in a context always of society. That we aren't simply persons. We change our ways all the time as we change places in society. As we grow older, we get into a role. We're really talking about a different view of the human being. When you're a sociologist, you look at society. You try to examine the importance of society. It's also important to realize that it's very difficult for us, for me, for a long time, it was very difficult to accept sociology, and many of you will reject it, because Americans do not believe in sociology. Our culture does not emphasize the social context of the individual. Europeans do. Europeans have a much easier way of accepting sociology. We tend to believe, ultimately, I would argue, that this human being is a snowflake, is in fact an individual. And this individual is different from all other individuals. And this individual is in control of his own body and his own life. He is in fact free, and he chooses all of the things that he chooses. There is an emphasis in our society on the individual and on freedom. And when you emphasize the individual and freedom, you really have to, in many ways, put aside sociology. And so every time I teach sociology, there are people I get notes on my books that people read, and they say, "Oh, I just don't believe in what you're telling me," and I can understand. Just understand that we live in a society. We have a culture. We have certain values. We have certain beliefs. And we everything around us teaches us certain things. And most of the time, the things that we are taught have nothing to do with sociology, because of the fact that our culture is so individualistic. The third problem with sociology is some fool like me comes around and says sociology is a science. And many people, no, they can't believe that sociology is a science, and so they kind of reject it. It's just kind of a whole bunch of things that people kind of believe in. I'll talk about science but once I introduce you, listen, you know, the whole essence of science is that things exist in nature. The whole essence of science is natural law. The whole essence of science is natural cause. Now, if you think of that, then if sociology assumes that it's a science, it believes those three things. That human beings are part of nature, and therefore that we can understand human beings in terms of natural cause, and also that we can generalize. That's what science also does. It generalizes in theories. Now, I'm not so stupid to argue that physics and sociology are equal. One is far more exact than the other. But the basic assumptions of natural law, the basic assumptions of natural cause, the basic assumption that you can generalize human beings is, I think, a very important principle. But most people don't accept what I've described about science. Science, in their I think, erroneous view is perfect or truth and all that, and sociologists don't do that. And therefore, they're not scientists. There's also this problem of determinism is something that people really fight against also, and are unwilling to really look at sociology as it is. Most human beings want to believe, especially in this country, that the human being is free. Ultimately, we make our own choices. We have a court system that assumes we are free. We basically believe and we understand that human beings make choices. Everybody's telling me all the time, well, he made a choice. Well, that's our view of the human being, that we kind of believe that our choices are free choices. The purpose of sociology and psychology and political science and all the social sciences is to teach us that things that we do are really determined on what we do. That is, that influences what we do. Psychologist accepts that, the political science, the economist. We're all believing that somehow or another my choices as an individual is not my choice as an individual. That ultimately much of my life is determined by forces that I do not understand. And when a sociologist talks about society, the sociologist talks about culture. What's culture? Culture is something that produces us. Class. We're born into a class. What does class do to us? It determines what we are able to do. That's how we think. There's also a problem with the problem of view of human beings. This society is not only also individualistic, it is also very biological and physical. There is a great deal of biology in the society which ultimately argues that it is biology or chemistry which basically creates the human being. No sociologist would argue that humans are simply animals. The sociologist argues that the human being is a very different thing from the whale and very different thing about other animals. And there's a real, and everybody kind of understands a certain view of human beings. The sociologist simply says the most important characteristic of the human being is that we live in a social world. We are social beings. And a lot of people have to reject that. Some would say, oh, well, we're sinners, or we're evil, or we're good, or we're violent. Or when we get into the human nature business, the sociologists would say the only evidence that we really have about the human being is that we are social, through and through. And I have to tell you, and you probably know, one reason why sociology is so difficult for people to accept is it's very, very, very hard to understand human beings. And sociologists are not only trying to understand human beings, you can understand this physical person pretty easily, but how do you understand something that is invisible? Society. How do you measure it? And for a lot of people, that makes it difficult. I fight it all the time. Almost every time. I don't have discussions with people anymore. I just sit and listen, because in fact, I really find that most people, this is the only group that I'm going to be able to talk about what I really believe. As a matter of fact, this is the last lecture I think I'm ever going to give on sociology. Right? Yeah, really. Truly. But anyway, I want you to know that there's a lot of people who are very critical of sociology. I understand why they are. But I think that sociology has really, really opened my mind and showed me a lot of things that other things or other subjects did not teach me. Are there any questions? You want to issue any issues here at this time? Well, okay, then I'm going to go through some words, some ideas And if you want to talk about it, I'd love to do that. You see, the idea that society exists is very difficult. What happened? There it is. Gotcha. Society, for many people, sociology discovers, I hate to use the word, discovers society in many ways. It says ultimately that a long time ago, people interacted, and as they interacted, they formed certain patterns, and other people then follow those patterns and follow those patterns and change those patterns, and every single individual is born into a society that existed before he or she lived, and that when we die, the society continues into the next generation. Society then, from a sociological point of view, is an entity. It is a thing in itself that works. A lot of people say to me, well, isn't society just a bunch of individuals? Many people believe that, but from the sociologist's point of view, it's not a bunch of individuals. Ultimately, it's a bunch of rules. It's a bunch of views. It's a bunch of things that go back 100 years. That's the society that exists over me. Society has certain qualities. For example, society has a social structure, and we can understand that structure. Society has a culture, and we can understand that culture. Society has institutions, and we can understand those institutions. But it is an entity. And as a matter of fact, it's very, very important, I think, to understand. It sounds silly, I know. But the question that always people ask me is, what came first, the society or the individual? And the answer is easy. Individuals were not human. To be human, people have to live within a society. They have to be born into a society. Now try to explain why that is. The idea is then that from the point of view of evolution, with the animals that are close to human beings in evolution also have societies. And as they come closer and closer to the human being, their societies are more and more alike. But ultimately, there is no human being running around in nature, fighting around and hurting each other, and then they get together and, let's have a society. No, you're born into some kind of society. Any questions, issues? Ken? Okay. Not even looking at my notes. People like to talk about, as I said before, human nature. I think that the idea of human nature is something that each culture decides on, and that each culture determines, and that persons come to understand that human beings are evil, or human beings are competitive. I mean, in this society, we believe human beings are competitive in their very nature. We talk about, human beings are violent. They're very competitive. Almost every single quality that you can name in terms of human nature has an opposite that is also acceptable. That is, we argue, for example, that human beings are evil, and at the same time, many of us argue that human beings really love. They love. They are good. Some human beings argue we're all competitive, but at the same time, human beings have to be cooperative in order to exist. Only thing to me where there's any kind of evidence is that human beings are social. And we can list about 5 or 6 things that really make us social beings. Number 1, survival. Human beings survive as infants in a social environment. Through childhood, it is important for individuals to interact with other human beings. It's also true that the vast majority of human beings live in some kind of a social order. That is, they need, to many extent, we need the relationships with other human beings. To survive as a child, you have to be social. Because you cannot do anything, in a sense, because you're without the family. But it's also true of human beings who grow older. We need relationships. Not only do we need relationships, we need a plumber, and we need a teacher, and we need a minister. And much of our survival as humans is a social survival. It's also, the second thing is, not only is it necessary to be social in terms of survival, we learn how to survive rather than biology telling us to survive. We learn to grow things. We learn to have can't think of the word, deodorant. We have to guns. We have all the things that we survive in terms of living a life is really social. Human beings, I would claim, do not have instincts. We have perhaps reflexes. We have drives, biological drives. But I would claim that if you define an instinct as something in terms of if you define instinct as a way of doing something which is fairly complex, such as building a nest with a bird, human beings have not any of that. What we build is really a result of our social life. Wars, every aspect of survival is a matter of socialization. Well, let's see. As a matter of fact, I think we also know that human beings are, to some extent, individually biological, but at the same time, on top of biology, we have a great many social characteristics which are social, and they are social. Conscience is socially created on the individual. My values are socially created. My ideas are socially created. Whether or not I use a gun or a bow and arrow or a spear, that's all socially created. What I value love, or I value America, or I value materialism. All of these kinds of things are socially created. I think almost entirely, but the biologist says, well, no, but the individuals in this room are, to a great extent, social products. They're individual aspects. You would have been much, much different if your social life would have been different. So in those three things, there's one other thing. There's one other thing that's really, really important. Is language is really the essence of the human being. When you talk about language, the ability to think with language and to communicate with language and learn and teach through language and all the other things that we do with language, language becomes central. Take away language and what are we? Well, language is produced by our social life. It is, in fact, defined by the people we interact with and understand us and we communicate to. Language, if we look at the essence of the human being, my claim would be it is language. And if it is language, then it is something that is socially created. I also believe that human beings have a self. Now, there's a different way of defining self. But if you think of self as self-reflection, self-control, self in terms of an object, the human being as an object to itself, that too is a social creation. We come to see ourselves through the eyes of other people who interact with us. And as we do that, we are able to do things that other animals are not able to do. And that is, they're able to reflect on themselves as objects. That is also social. You look at what's her name in the, forget it. If you take away the self, all that the human being would be doing is responding to stimuli. And that is not what we do. We understand, we think, we have language, and we're able to develop a self. I was just talking to somebody before here about computers and human beings, and he was trying to argue, well, computers have symbols, they have the software, and therefore, in many ways, they are like human beings. On the other hand, I'm not sure that's correct, but one of the arguments that I would make is that the self is not part of what the computer is able to do. Yeah.
We have a conscience.
Yeah, we have a conscience. Conscience, what is conscience?
Ability to know right from wrong.
Right from wrong. Where does your view of right and wrong come from? Society. Language again, and self. Because what you do, what really, ultimately what happens is, with language and self, you're able to tell yourself what is good and what is right. And you should go in this direction or this direction. based on good and evil, which you're able to. So a conscience basically is a self and the use of language. And no question that the essence of the human being is a socially created conscience.
Joel,
Yes.
as some of you in the room probably know,
Say louder.
as some of you in the room probably know, I recently gave a talk on some of the founders. If you take John Adams and Ben Franklin, you can illustrate what Joel was saying. John Adams was highly individualistic, highly moralistic, had a very heightened sense of conscience. So he was known as Honest John Adams. And he was almost a disaster when he arrived in France, where Ben Franklin did very well because Ben Franklin had an underdeveloped conscience.
From the point of view of Adams.
Especially from the point of view of someone like Adams. But from the point of view of the French people, and especially the French elite ladies, Ben Franklin was a very superior person to John Adams.
Superior?
Superior to them, yes. To
Okay.
them.
Remember, we're talking about values, and values are a matter of social creation.
Right. And there you get to see the cultural differences, and that even though Ben Franklin and John Adams were both raised in the Puritan tradition in fourth generation down in New England, they couldn't have turned out more different. And John Adams remained intensely religious all of his life. Ben Franklin said, when I meet someone, I like to have them think when we separate that I agree with their religion. Even though I hardly ever do.
Why
But he
is
never disagreed with them because what have you achieved by disagreeing with someone about religion?
Why is it that they were different? How do you explain differences? Social life. How do you explain sameness? Social life. If you want to understand, and from a sociological point of view, why we are different and why we are the same, then it's important to understand our social life. Yeah.
I'm still mulling over the point that you made about human beings aren't instinctive.
Yes.
But what about in the case of of young mothers who have their newborn babies and when they're first born? Isn't that an instinctive, almost maternal feeling to protect that young? Doesn't that come from within? And
Yeah, but
instinct?
that may be true. I'm not sure that's true, but maybe that's true. But I wouldn't call it instinct. See, I would call how does the mother deal with the child? Has nature told the mother what to do with the child? The only thing that the mother breastfeeds the child, but pretty soon it's the Bible.
Right, but initially, the mother's instinct toward that child is one of preservation and protection. And I think that's more of an instinctive thing, therefore,
I think I would not necessarily say that. But if you're right, then I'm wrong. But I think that there are many human beings who are mothers who do not see the child as what you're describing. The child is an object, and that also is part of society. The way that human beings see themselves and define themselves as objects.
The patterns of society that we develop, though, are influenced by natural phenomena. Let's take, I read recently that in Iceland they have like 30 words for lizard. So it affects language, it affects lifestyle. So we have natural phenomena. Then we have biological factors, I think, that affect human beings. For example, the difference between the men and women in terms of testosterone. You take a woman, give her a shot at testosterone, and her behavior is somewhat different. So there are some aspects of our social, of our society that are affected by natural phenomena.
Yes.
And biological.
Yes, but I want to emphasize one thing that you're mentioning. There really may be testosterone and non-testosterone. It may be that human beings have a biological gender relation characteristic. But what has experimented in this society for the last 100 years, certainly, is that almost everything that a man can do, women can do. And see, that becomes, to me, that really emphasizes the importance of our social life. Yeah.
I just,
Go ahead.
I was just commenting on the instinct part of like a young mother. When you were saying instinct, you were saying things like a bird building a nest,
Yes.
which is the complicated thing.
Yes.
Yes, as soon as you see the baby, you love the baby, but you don't know, or maybe you feel attracted to it or something, but you don't know how to feed it, you don't know how to give it a bath, you don't know how to do all the things, at least I didn't. So, you know, if it is an instinct, I did not have.
Yeah, and if you're talking about a complex kind of action, like building a nest,
Right,
then I would claim it's not an instinct.
right. So the attraction to the baby, maybe wanting.
And I like the word attraction rather than love. I would argue love, what I would call love, is entirely a social creation.
Yeah, but certainly there's some feeling immediately that this is your baby.
Oh yeah, there's feeling,
Yeah,
emotion,
Yes.
sure.
that is there, but.
But I can be angry that I have a child,
Yes,
and I can do all kinds of things to destroy my child. It's not, I think, just simply a matter of loving
yeah,
what you're saying with the child. I think attraction is a much better
yes,
answer.
yeah.
Are emotions also guided by society?
Oh. Is emotions guided by society? You betcha! To a great extent, and a lot of things that were, to a great extent, the difference between a dog and a human being is a dog has an emotion that gives off. Human beings are socialized in terms of anger, jealousy, all of the different characteristics that we give those emotions. We control our emotions. We direct our emotions. The thing is, we are emotional, but we also have a self. And because we have a self, I'm mad, I'm ticked. I love you. See, what I'm saying is, I'm talking to me about my emotional life. Very social. We learn to direct certain certain ways of expressing emotion. As a matter of fact, there's a really good book about doctors and stewardesses in airplanes. They have to manage their emotions more than most of us. Manage them. And we're taught in society to imagine our emotions. But there is certainly also a biological aspect of emotion. But, you know, it's very complicated. Because let's say, for example, if I get angry, anger is an emotion. What gets me angry? What gets me angry is dependent on what I have learned about the world. So what gets you angry is different from what gets me angry. Didn't I see a hand up here and then here? You're going to go through it again, yeah.
Society, though, defines what's acceptable behavior and acts. You may have emotions, and express them whichever way you want, but society defines what is acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Right. You see, one of the things that is listed on your list is the whole idea of deviance. Who is deviant and who is not deviant? That is a social construction. It is decided by people who are outside of the society, basically, and have to be stigmatized. The stigmatization of people is a socially constructed thing. Lines that are developed socially. So you really look at more, I haven't even talked about this, but some of you were here when I was talking about Marx. And Marx argued, and I think it's his most important idea, is that society produces the ideas that we believe. That is one of the most scariest and one of the most important ideas. You and I have certain ideas. We believe those ideas to be true. Sociologists would argue they may be somewhat true, but they have been produced by your society and the groups that you have lived in. We have ideas in this. It's very, very hard to talk about this, about our culture. Our culture tells us very much that the most important thing in life is material success. It becomes, that idea is a very important idea in a capitalistic society. Students are no good anymore. They don't listen to professors anymore. That tends to be the view that professors have from their perspective. When you talk about justice in the world and you talk about values in life and the ideas, I mean, look at here. I am talking about sociology. Is this the truth? It's silly for me to believe it's the truth. It is just one way, that there is one way of understanding reality. There's not one way to understand reality. There are many ways of understanding reality. Psychologists tell us some very important things. Biologists tell us important things. And the Iraqis tell us certain things. And Jews and Christians and whatever else, they tell us things that are different. Again, in every case, socially created.
What about the case where man is the only animal or thing that knows it's going to die? That's separate from all other species. We're the only ones that know we're going to die. And that makes us different.
Do you know what one of the most important things that human beings believe in? Immortality. That we aren't going to die. mean, that's exactly what we have, you see, the thing about the human being, I like to use the word understanding. We understand things. We understand things because we have language. There's a difference between a stimulus and a response and the ability to understand something. So I can talk with you with language and talk with you about death. And neither one of us have died. We can talk about death. We can talk about the future. We can talk about people who have died in the past. We can do all kinds of things about death, including the question, will I die? And the question, can I somehow be forever? Meaning. I mean, you don't have chimps sitting around talking about meaning. There really is a very, I think this is a very, very important position. These are symbols. This is language. And once you start understanding, you can do all kinds of things. I'll give you just this one example. It's a poor one, but my son Andrew. Did I tell you this one before? I taught him Andrew. And one day I said to him, "You're a big boy, Andrew. Big boy." He said to me, Dad. Learn those words. One day, he said to me, I said to him, Andrew, we're going to have to go to bed pretty soon, in a little while. And he said to me, no, Dad, in a big while. Now, I never taught him big while, but he came to understand what big means. He understands, basically, what while means and all these other things. He can put those things together. But if you really think about the human being, I think it's just amazing that we can understand things. You know, we can understand men and women. We can generalize about chairs, and we can understand chairs, and we can think of different kinds of chairs because we understand what a chair is, all socially created. We're able, you and I can talk about men and women and old people and young people and middle people, and we can talk about children, and we can talk about bad children, we can talk about good children, talk about little girls, little boys. All these words have an understanding. They're not a sign. They're not to call a word. It is an understanding. And the thing about understanding is that we're able to apply our understanding from all kinds of situations. When I walk into another room, I know what another room is. I understand how to act in another room. I understand how to act in a school or in a church or whatever. All of that is understanding. It's not stimulus response. And that notion of understanding is something that is socially created basically by language. Language really allows us to Marx argued the difference between human beings and other animals is that we can work nature. We can actually do things with nature. We don't have to respond to nature. And that active aspect of the human being is really the fact that we have language.
Isn't that what you say, when you understand the language of another country, you understand their society?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah, what's important in their society, and their ideas, their values. But you know, I understand. It's a terribly difficult thing to define, but it's very, very important. We understand things. We stand under the stimulus.
You're going to have a talk in a few days from someone who's born and raised in the South, Andy Fry. And he's going to
Who? What?
Andy Fry is going to be giving a talk on the South. Nothing is more basic to our history than the fact that we were North and South. If you'd have been living back at the founding of the country, or just before the Civil War, and you would have gone from the North to the South, nothing would have shocked you like seeing Southern white women always turning their babies to a nanny. That was as shocking to Northerners, especially mothers in the North, as when I went from Minnesota, where we learned to hate Indians but not hate blacks, and see two water fountains for black and white. Think of what was going on there. Because the Southerners had slaves and slavery, they trusted their blacks with their babies to nurse them.
I'm going to go through the rest of the lecture in 1 minute. Society exists. That's one idea. Humans are social beings. That's a second idea in sociology. Humans can be understood scientifically is the third thing. It depends on your definition of science. But if you assume that science is a way of understanding reality rather than truth, and it isn't truth. Most scientists do not define science as truth. They basically argue that science is an open search for understanding using as much empirical evidence as we can find. Truth, we touched on it. Truth is socially created. Reality isn't socially created. Truth is. In other words, there may be a reality here, but what I see it through language is the truth that I believe exists, but that's my truth that has come from a social life. I can't tell you what this is. As soon as you call it something, you see it according to a social creation. That is a paper, for example. This is paper, or this is beginning of an airplane, or whatever else we do. But whatever it is, whatever that reality is, between that reality and my truth is a social construction. We are much less free than we think. I like to make one argument that one of the reasons why we are told we are free all the time is the fact that somebody is telling us that we are free rather than we really have free choice. I think it's a very important thing. I do think we have free choice. How can I do that? It's a social creation because of language. It's through language we're able to think about our environment and to think our own ideas about the environment, and in that case, we can develop a certain amount of freedom. Also self. What is freedom? It's self-direction. Telling myself what to do and telling myself what not to do. Symbols, humans are unique. We have symbols, self, mind, consciousness, conscience, and understanding, not responding. Deviance, and this is the social creation, is a social differences and a social creation creates deviance. Homosexuality, from a sociological point of view, homosexuality is a deviance in the society because we define it as that, not because it is. And the reason why we do that is that people who are different are threatening to society. And so deviance is really a social construction by society to protect society from its truths. Society is always equal. Society is always unequal. Most of sociology is a study of inequality. So I use the word structure, class, power, divisions of labor, oligarchy, bureaucracy, authority. I would claim there's no such thing as a democratic organization unless we're talking about friendship. We can talk about friendship, perhaps. But once you get 3 people or 4 people or 5 people, as soon as you get an organization, you have a system of inequality in that organization. That doesn't mean a society has, all societies have an equal amount of inequality, but all societies, every group, Sun City Anthem has an oligarchy, has a small group that dominates. When I talk about the human being, I don't talk about the human being as a person. I don't talk about the human being as a personality. I talk about the human being as actors rather than persons. We're acting. We're actors. We do things in the world. And we do things in the world, and that's very important, according to the roles that we are in, the ideas, the perspectives that come from our roles, our identities. Hey man, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Socially created positions, socially created identities, privilege, prestige, power. These are the qualities I think sociologists emphasize when looking at the human being. One of the things that I think is also universal is ethnocentrism. I think it's very, very difficult for a group of people, very difficult for a group of people to believe that they have the truth and then see somebody who's very difficult, very different, and say, oh my, you have a different view. Isn't that interesting? We like what we have believed. And because of that, there is great ethnocentrism. It's great that we believe that our values are not social, they are true values. Their society has social values because they're not real, but we have real values. Or real, and that's part of the reason there's war, it's part of the reason there's conflict. I think it is a very important part of what human beings do because of their social life. Order is very important in society, and society exists because of certain qualities that create order. These are the patterns that we develop. We develop structure and culture and institutions. And we socialize people, we force people, we punish people, we reward people, we bring them a religion so that they are loyal to the society and the religious basis of society. And conflict itself brings order to some extent because it highlights the problems in society. I'm a big on social power. I think social power is central to all human relationships. And if you do not understand social power when you see human beings interacting, I think you do not understand what's going on between them. And social change is also inevitable. It's very complex. I think that Karl Marx is wrong with saying that the only way that society changes is through revolution and conflict. There are many, many ways that society changes. I don't usually think of individuals really changing society, but there are some exceptions. I think of trends as important in society. And the most important trend in the world, I think, is the trend of traditional and modern societies. The development of societies from traditional ways to modern ways. Now again, these are words, but I find this to be very, very useful in terms of understanding, and I think sociologists use this a lot. In the end, if we define sociology as I would, sociology is the study of the human being as a social being, studies society, social interaction, social organization, social institutions, social problems. It is a science, a social science, a perspective, one way of seeing reality. Any final questions? I think it's a very interesting thing. It really has changed my life a lot. It's paid a lot of my ways for my kids to get through college. Other things, but
The other thing, you said society is an entity, it becomes clear when you look back at the society 100 years ago. Then you see the entity there, the Victorian society or the societies in the 1920s or 40s. You can see the distinction as it evolved. So that way, in the future you can't say.
and you could also do it with individuals. You see, you and I are different than we were 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 50 years ago, because our roles are different, and our society has changed. I mean, and my view of women was, I did not believe, truly, I did not believe that women could be athletes. I grew up with the belief that baseball and football and basketball and all the things, those were male things. The society has changed, and I have changed. And so has the gyms changed. Now the gym has to split between the men and the women. Men had a real good deal going because they could have the gymnasium and women didn't have to. They didn't have to compete with the women. Yeah.
You mentioned that society was very complex and the human was complex. In order to analyze such a thing, you'd have to have a lot of data. Has the presence of the computer given rise to a lot better understanding?
Yes and no. I don't like computer sociology. I think that computer sociology tends to simplify human beings more than they should be. Surveys, for example, really do not tell me very much because, number one, usually they're not really good surveys. And number two, people are just checking off things based on certain things. I feel like a lot of sociologists now use interviews. And even though it's not a good way of getting a sample, a selected sample, which would be very good, interviews allow you to go into depth. And I like interviews much better. But you're right. Most sociologists would disagree with me. Most sociologists are working very hard on computers. When I did my dissertation, computers were wonderful.
If you had a lot of data,
A lot of data. Well, yeah, I can just tell you one thing that we did. A friend of mine and I at Morehead State, I had a judge in Minneapolis who was really a very kind of famous judge. A very nice guy. I knew him personally. said to the other guy, by the name of Joel, by the way, Joel, let's interview him and see if we can get a book out of him, in biography, his life as a judge, and understand how he thinks about the system, and we were all set for it. We interviewed him for a whole year. And it was absolutely fascinating. But to sit down and figure out what you have after all this time is almost impossible. We never wrote a book or anything else. It was just too much work. And there's a lot of work. And so sociologists who have money, and if they're money, there's somebody out there who's giving them money and therefore is really wanting them to learn certain things that supports them. But those who have money are able to use computers and do well.
Along with what you said, which I think was fascinating, my nephew is a professor of anthropology in California. He did his doctorate on one of the tribes in Bolivia, real primitive tribe. And he set up a whole thing. He still goes down there about twice a year. I think he teaches 2 semesters, and 2 semesters goes down to Bolivia. And what he was trying to do, he did his dissertation on, was a primitive way of life. And then they're slowly bringing in some culture there. Now he set up a whole thing with doctors going down there and giving them, trying slowly to modernize them and seeing what the outside world and how it's going to affect them. And he gets a lot of money from federal grants. The federal grants is what's sponsoring this whole thing. But when I speak to him and he tells me about how society is interacted with them, it's really fascinating. The whole idea of how at first they didn't even want. He was the first white man I think they have ever seen. Because he's there, it takes him 3 days by canoe to even get to their tribe.
That's another you're giving another problem in science. And that is, science can also change people, can change their values and their ideas and whatever. One, I think, has to be careful to argue that modern society is better than traditional society. And part of the problem that sociologists and anthropologists just have is they go into a group and, in a sense, they change the group because they're there. And that, let me just say, before you go on 1 second, there is a discussion this Friday on equality and inequality at my home, 10:30. And it's at 1843 Morganton Drive. You can get the address over here. Question?
Could you elaborate more on what you mean by social power?
Social power is very, 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 very hard to define. It means, in general, that if I have social power in relation to you, then, well, I have to think my way out. It's really the fact that I'm woman. Just can't do it. Can't get. I don't want to get. Social power is really the attempt by an individual to alter another individual or group. Pardon? Yeah, intentionally. It's an intentional act it's an intentional act of achieving your will in relation to another person's will. Manipulation is one characteristic of one type of social power. But there is also attractiveness. If I'm very attractive, which I am, I have power in relation to others. I mean, presidents, they have power because we are attracted to them. Money, I don't know if you do that, but money is power. So organized people who organize and try to get their way in society, they have social power. I have social power in relationship to my children. And to some extent, they have some social power in relation to me. If they cry in the grocery store and I listen to them and tell them to be quiet, I'll give them candy, that becomes an act of social power.
I think one of the greatest examples of social power is the way you went from being a high school teacher to being a professor.
I went from being a farm boy to being somebody that's people listen to, or at least I assume they should, by getting a PhD.
Here's an example of
An interest group that's created power.
for themselves called professors. They'll claim they don't have much power. They have great power over access to professions. They have great power when they write letters or refuse to. They have awesome power in our culture.
And they didn't have 100 years ago. And one of the things they had to do was stop associating with churches and associate with science. Okay? And they use language that is extremely, so that everybody should pay attention to. That's why I asked about whether it was going to be in the test or not.
Well, he mentioned science. You can look at science as a community, and you can understand social power within that community. Because some people in that community have far more social power than others. Professors versus instructors, Berkeley people, so on and so forth. So, it's almost every single relationship, every single act of interaction is an attempt by each person or one of the persons to exert his or her will in relation to the other.
I was just thinking when you mentioned social power, one of the problems with retirement is that we have to give up some of our social power. That's why I persist in continuing to work, I guess. But that was not my main point. My main point was that you mentioned ethnocentrism as being universal.
Ethnocentrism? Yeah.
Ethnocentrism.
Thanks for coming.
Are there any, when you think about all the different social mores, values that different societies have, are there, apart from religion, are there any universal values that seem to be in all societies, such as freedom of expression or others?
Well, you mentioned religion. Religion is, I would claim, universal. It isn't because of our biology, however. It's because of the nature of society. Religion is a very, very important part of society's order. It's very, very important for people to be human with conscience through religion. I think it's very important to realize that religion often has certain objects, gods or crosses or stars or something that is holy and is sacred, and that sacredness and holiness brings people together. So religion, I think, is in fact universal, although there is one country in the world that is you never guess, that is very, very very secular. There's really hardly any religion in it. I won't say because then people, Japan is very, very secular. I have been told.
They very strong value.
Yes, of course. The values are important. But okay, now, you're asking me for universal. You don't have society unless you have social interaction, social organization, social institutions, social problems. You don't have society if inequality is in fact part of every society. ethnocentrism, I think, is inequality, is universal. Every society has religion, or almost every society has religion. Americans are different because we have different religions, and it's very unusual for a society to have different religions. But you see, what I would say is that there are certain there's one trend. I think it's the biggest trend in the world, and that is tradition becoming modern. Once modernization starts in a society, the cork is out or the genie is all out, and all you can do is become more and more and more and more modern. And it becomes increasingly individualism. It increases more science, the development of non-traditions, the development of commerce, trade, and I keep thinking of the Fiddler on the Roof more than anything that I've ever seen. Really tells us what happens to a people who live in a traditional society and for some reason or another they interact with people outside that society, and what's gone is tradition. And I think that the whole world, we're talking about globalization, we talk about globalization all the time, and I figured out it's not globalization, it's modernization. Modernization really pushes us for globalization. But I think that to me, that really is a very, very, very important problem, issue. It's the reason why people divorce in society. It's like people in our society, 44% of our people in this society are in a different religion than their parents taught them. 44% in America. No, well, dominant. Well, I don't know. My friends and I fight all the time. I think that secularization is far more important than religion in the society. I know that you probably don't believe that, but I really do. I think that you do believe it. And I think that I think that religion and tradition are things that people it's very difficult for people to believe in religion without having their whole life being religious. People in traditional societies have religion, and they have it throughout the society. What we want is our ability to take our car to a drive-in and have a service from our car. Mourning has changed because we don't have the time to mourn. It used to be. I had a friend a social worker in Morehead State. He took me to a cemetery, and Dick Dubord, and he says, look at this cemetery, Joel. And this was in rural North Dakota, and there are 15 Dubords over here, and there is all kinds of. He knows all the families in that place. That's traditional society. For most people, we don't even know where we want to be buried. And so I think that's what happens in modern life. And I think it's a very interesting, it's not my idea, it's Max Weber is really the important person. That modern life changes everything. And if you want to tell me that the individual really has a choice in terms of making our society, I would find it silly. Individuals don't. Modernization does.
You mentioned that this would be your last lecture. So you might reconsider and consider social deviance. I noticed that you implied it was because of social interaction, but how about the biological chemical input? And if it affects one person, to what extent does it affect a large percentage of the society? It might
You're
not be
talking about
interaction,
social.
it might be...
That is social.
Well, it might be chemical, right?
Well, it's chemical, maybe. But I don't want to get into that. I'm sorry. And I don't think I can get into that either. I mean, I think most of this is social. We actually have to draw the lines. There are very weird people in this room. And there are a lot of weird people out there. But the lines are established by society in terms of what is deviant and what is not deviant. I mean, homosexuality to me is really the very, very best example of that whole thing. And I know that we believe that homosexuality is sick, or homosexuality is this or that or the other thing, but ultimately we call it sick, or we call it bad, or we call it immoral, or we call it unnatural, because we have drawn a line and said that is outside of the order, and basically we do it because we are fearful of that action.
Immanuel Kant was the imperative. Remember what he said? You judge something moral if everyone did it. The whole society was homosexual. That would be a death trip for that society. If you look at, from my interpretation, the moral imperative, that's the content. If you look at that in a simple way, homosexuality is a death trip. It is death-oriented. It will not reproduce itself. That makes it, in my view, and I think maybe in Kant's not here, that this is obviously more than just a social construct. This is the very survival of that society.
Yeah, but it's very important for the social side. But I would argue that in 30 years, men and women are not going to have babies. And if men and women do not have babies, or at least there's alternatives to men and women, then homosexuality, from your point of view, is not necessary. No, it's not necessarily bad or unnatural. What I'm saying is that I certainly in 50 years after I'm dead, and you can tell me I'm wrong, in 50 years, the creation of human beings will not depend on two heterosexual people. It all right now. Oh yeah. As a matter of fact, we can take, oh sure, that's what we do. We put them in jars or whatever, and sure. And as a matter of fact, if everybody here was homosexual, we'd still be able to exist as a society.
Then the question becomes the socialization of that product, this process, this mechanization. Will that be the same socialized?
Oh no, it wouldn't be at all. But there, but,
And that's another moral judgment.
it sure is a moral.
How you define a person.
Absolutely. Yeah, a person is a definition of a person. Well, most of us know what a true human being is, and that's ourselves.
No, we don't. It's more than that. That's all, in some, we say Jesus Christ. That's the example of who we like immunitation. It's not just.
But that's a model. Yeah, it's a model. Models are very, very important.
My wife told me to shut up, I got one more problem.
Social power, you didn't.
I had a thought, by the way, when you mentioned being free. I said, whoever says they're free that has been and never been married. So, but anyway, I think about. I look at a different society and I say, I don't like their value, I don't like what they do, I don't like what their fathers do.
Me, I do too.
Then I said, well, I need to grasp and sit there.
Yes.
And understand the way they understood it. But in the end, when you think about Hitler, and Hitler won, you and I probably wouldn't have the freedom here to talk about it. Aren't there things that are...
Yeah, but from Hitler's, and I don't want to say this, but from Hitler's point of view, he was creating a supreme race. We're not getting a supreme race. You're asking the most basic question of social science and sociology, the whole question of relativism. And it's impossible to answer your question. But for me, I do, in fact, make value judgments. I do believe there are certain things that are wrong and certain things that are right. I understand. But I also understand that it is because of my social life that I have developed those things. And if I'm going to look at myself critically, then I should ask myself, what is it that they are doing which is wrong? Now, I decided for myself that I'm going to try not to be American, not to be religious, that ultimately, for me, I am going to believe in democratic values. And I will try to judge people and myself on the basis of democratic values. I don't claim that democratic values are absolutely true, but they are things that are important to me. And I think I can defend each one of those qualities. But it's difficult to do. So, for example, I believe that inequality is evil. I think equality is, and some people would not agree with me, equality is something that people should work for. I believe in freedom. I believe that it's a democratic value. Democratic value is basically that each person has a right to make his or her choices as much as possible. So I believe in people who are free and people who are in societies that encourage freedom. Third, I think that I believe in controlling social power. I think that democracy, democratic society, is a society that controls corporations, controls government, controls religion, controls any other big part of society over the individual. I know there's one other thing. There's one more quality. And I think that I personally, and I think we have to all do this. I've read a great deal of Eric Fromm's books. And to Eric Fromm, freedom is, in fact, the most important thing, and love is. And to him, love and freedom are values that we should work for. You and I can argue about these values, and I can go on the basis of my values, you go on yours. If you're going to be Hitler, I'm going to say basically, I really do not accept your values because they are democratic values, and these are democratic values that I believe in. It's very difficult. Thanks a lot.